Good afternoon and welcome to the AM 760 KFMB and the Brett Winterble Show. My name is Lou Pate. I'll be here this afternoon for Brett, who's getting some well-deserved R&R, and he'll return after the July 4th weekend. I hope he enjoys it with his family, as I hope everybody out there in the 760 KFMB has a nice and wonderful and safe 4th of July weekend. Dan Noon is here. John Ingalls is here. The team
present
and accounted for, sir, for the day. Thank you. Check. Got roll call in there. We're going to be taking your calls. 800-760 KFMB, 800-760-5362. We have breaking news. It's been breaking all day, actually unfolding as we speak in Dhaka, Bangladesh. Another terrorist attack. While the attack in Istanbul on Tuesday, June 28th, their figuring was planned out by ISIS. ISIS has not taken credit for it yet. Difference here in Dhaka, Bangladesh, is ISIS has taken credit. It is a live, fluid situation that is going on. 2 police officers dead, approximately somewhere between 20 and 40 hostages that are being taken, and 6 to 8 gunmen in a cafe in Dhaka, 1 mile from the U.S. Embassy. And again, those hostages are being held as we speak. And as we know, ISIS, they don't play games. So this is a very dangerous situation. And we are going to keep you updated on it throughout the entire show. We have a number of guests that are going to be joining us today. Talk a little Americana later on in the show, and also talk about the Olympics and look back on the doping scandals of the East Germans and how it pertains to the Rio Olympics that's coming. We'll have our special friend, Southern California's own, Chris Epting, will join us a little later in the show. But right now, with the situation going on in Bangladesh and the situation that had unfolded in Istanbul in the Ataturk airport just a few days ago, Deborah Weiss joins us. She is an attorney. She's an author who focuses on free speech and terrorism-related issues. She has served as the Assistant Corporation Counsel under both the Rudy Giuliani and Bloomberg administrations in New York. She has authored several books, The Organization of Islamic Corporations, Jihad on Free Speech being one, and she was contributing author to Saudi Arabia and the Global Islamic Network. You can check out Deborah Weiss's website at vigilancenow.org. Again, vigilancenow.org. Deborah Weiss, thank you in advance for your time being here on the AM 760 KFMB. I appreciate your time.
Thanks so much for having me, Lou.
Now, when we booked you earlier, it was to do a follow-up and pick your brain, and you were going to share your expertise on jihad and the rise of ISIS and the terrorist state and everything that transpired and what has transpired in the last 3 days in Istanbul. And now, boom, while we're waiting to go on earlier today, this hits. Nobody really knows what is going on aside from what I had just told you. I know that, within your world, you see things differently than, say, we, the lay person. But the thing that's different between this, Deborah Weiss, and Istanbul is ISIS has already taken credit. Why do you think they've jumped in, taken credit on this one, but they haven't taken credit on Istanbul, where it's turning out that the bombers, the terrorists, were Russian, probably Chechen or Dagestan, but still they feel authorities are saying today that ISIS probably helped in planning it. Why not just take credit for both? I mean, it's speculation, but what do you think?
Well, sometimes they take some time to claim responsibility, and there are a lot of internal politics in Turkey. They've actually committed several attacks over a smaller scale over the last year, and they haven't really taken responsibility for any of them, but the consensus is that it was ISIS-inspired for most of them.
Now, is this...
The government has the Turkish government has sometimes blamed the Kurds, but that's very disputable.
Now, we have this in Dhaka, Bangladesh today. We see Istanbul, Turkey. We see Bangladesh. Is this ramping up at such frequency because Ramadan is coming to an end, and depending upon where you are in the world, it could go as far as July 5th, July 6th, July 7th. But for the most part, it's wrapping up. Is this because of Ramadan's wrapping up, or is this the new norm? We're going to be seeing this with much more frequency.
I hate to say it, but I do think it's the new norm. ISIS and other Islamic terrorist groups do tend to plan their attacks with a lot of symbolism involved, whether it's location or timing. So, for example, in the Middle East, they'll target churches or statues that are very important to Christians to send a message. The Gay and Lesbian Center in Orlando was targeted during Gay Pride Month, which really wasn't mentioned in the media, and I don't think that was a coincidence. And while they might consider it more of a, well, I suppose I shouldn't be using the word mitzvah, but I'm going to. Maybe they think it's more of a mitzvah to do it during Ramadan. But I do, unfortunately, think that these attacks are ramping up. ISIS is obviously on the rise, despite the Obama administration's claims to the contrary, and you see them increasing. We're now, like, every week, every few days, this is the second major ISIS attack in 72 hours, and it's at a standoff at the moment. Right now, there are 20 hostages being held by armed attackers. There was a gun battle between the police that left 2 police officers dead. There are 40 injured, and the police were trying to find out what the hostages want, but they haven't made any demands. So they were shooting guns, and they were also had explosives. So much for solving the problem by gun legislation, right?
Deborah Weiss, what was that word you used?
Shrapnel?
No. The one when you said I shouldn't say it, then you giggled, you laughed. What you said?
Oh, mitzvah.
What? Yeah, I'm a goyim. I'm a goyim. Help a goyim out here.
Goy, not plural.
I'm a goyim. See, I can't even get that one right. What is that word?
It means a good deed. I don't even know if it's Hebrew or Yiddish because I don't speak either, but it means a good deed. But it's either Hebrew or Yiddish, so that's why it wouldn't really
it might
be the right word to use in this case.
It might be Hebrew or Yiddish slang. You never know.
It's not slang. I know that. It's a real thing.
All right.
Yeah.
Now, if I could just digress, you were talking about the attacks, and you mentioned Paris, Brussels, Orlando, and it being Gay Pride Month. The issue here, I just want to go on a little sidebar here, away from Bangladesh, away from Istanbul for a second, but in the realm of ISIS and Islamic terrorism, and the American media. I noticed that President Obama, Hillary Clinton, John Kerry, and the Democratic Party and the media threw the gay community under the bus when it came to the Orlando terrorist act. And what I mean by that is Obama obviously has his head in the sand like an ostrich when it comes to radical Islam and terrorism and the links there. So he won't acknowledge it. As the world knows, he won't even say it. But then they wanted to make the conversation about guns, okay? Right. And actually, John Ingalls provided me with a story today about Governor Brown signing, I believe it was 5 or 6 vetoes on gun regulation. I got to hone up on that for a little later. But they kind of just left the gay community in the dust, and they chose, okay, we're going to separate this terrorist attack from actual identifying it as terrorism, and we're going to make it about guns. And in my opinion, the gay community, be damned, according to the Obama administration, and they didn't acknowledge them much. It made it all about guns. It was all about, guns, guns, guns. And, the gays were just kind of left out there. They kind of were in the periphery of the picture, but they certainly weren't front and center.
Well, I have to disagree with that slightly, Lou, because they did make a big deal about so-called homophobia, of course blaming it on the Christian right even though an ISIS-inspired Muslim committed the attack, the administration, or I shouldn't say the administration, some people did blame Christians for, quote, creating an environment where this would be more likely to happen.
Now, while we're in agreement, those things were said. The red meat of the week following and the 2 weeks following Orlando was the anti-gun narrative, no?
That was their solution, and I have to say, though, that I think, unfortunately, by and large, the LGBT community were willing participants in that false narrative. I mean, I was on Facebook, and I had posted my analysis right after the attack, and somebody had shared it on a timeline that had a lot of conservatives on one hand, but gay friends on the other, and I was lambasted by all the gay men saying, oh, yeah, there's a boogeyman behind every corner, and calling me a bigot just because I said it was an Islamic terrorist attack. And with the exception of the log cabin Republicans, none of the organizations within the gay community have made affirmative statements condemning Islamic terrorism or acknowledging its existence.
Sounds like they're putting their politics before their sexuality and their causes.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Now, I want to get back to the issue. I'm sorry to interrupt. I want to get back to the issue of something that you brought up to me, the issue of Islamic terrorism. We saw Istanbul, which was the original reason why you were coming on the show today. And while we're waiting for the show, Bangladesh happens. A Hindu priest was hacked to death. And although you have not said it on the show yet, during our show prep and our back and forth and our emails, you highlighted that an American girl in Israel was stabbed to death.
Yeah.
Now, was she on vacation? Was she an expat?
No, what happened was in the West Bank, in the dark of night, while she was sleeping, a terrorist entered her home and stabbed her to death while she was in bed. And you can easily find photos of it online. It's very hard to look at. I work on terrorism-related issues all the time. I don't normally get emotional about it, but this seems so different because it wasn't even somebody in public. It's like entered her home, a little girl with her teddy bear there. You can see her teddy bear, and the blood all over the place. Now, you can't tell me these are, partners for peace. The important point it was in the West Bank, and she had dual citizenship. So she had Israeli citizenship, and she was also an American citizen. And I want to point out to you, Lou, that the Obama has been completely silent on the issue of that murder, completely silent.
I guess the family shouldn't hold their breath waiting for a conciliatory phone call. Deborah Weiss, hold your thoughts. We're going to continue on. If you, the listeners to the Brett Winterble Show, would like to take part in the conversation, whenever I have a guest, I invite you into the fray. 800-760-KFMB, 800-760-KFMB. We'll continue our conversation on the terrorist attack, which is still unfolding in Dhaka, Bangladesh. Update on Istanbul. Again, the hacking to death of a Hindu priest. The increased frequency of terrorists by the Islamic State. ISIS taking credit for this one. We'll talk about it more here on the Brett Winterble Show on the AM 760 KFMB. Welcome back to the Brett Winterble Show on the AM 760 KFMB. Lou Pate here with you, sitting in for Brett. Glad to be here. Thrilled to be here, actually, along with Dan, along with John. We are a team. And now we have a special guest continuing on with us, Deborah Weiss, an attorney and author focusing on free speech and terrorist-related subjects. Again, check out her website at vigilancenow.com. And can't be mentioned enough, the new book coming out, The Organization of Islamic Cooperation's Jihad on Free Speech. Deborah Weiss, when it comes to when things happen like in Istanbul, when it comes to now in Dhaka, Bangladesh, boy, they according to the left, they must have gun control problems there and bomb control problems there because these people are using guns and bombs. I know it's off your expertise. I'm being a little sarcastic, but what's going to be the left's answer for this in America today, that Bangladesh and Istanbul have a bomb and gun problem?
Yeah, it's not really off my area. The left just tends to write false narratives, to be honest with you. I mean, as you said, they want to stick their head in the sand, not know what's going on. It has nothing to do with Islam, even though the attackers repeatedly say that's what it is. In this case, in Bangladesh, they were screaming Allahu Akbar before they did it. And it's basically political correctness. So they'll always have an excuse. They need jobs, it's education, they had a family problem. And I can't tell you specifically what the false narrative will be this time, but it might be local legitimate grievances, that kind of thing. But I do want to make two quick points, if I may.
Sure.
One, because you mentioned the terrorist attack in Israel, and one reason that is important to us is the audience needs to understand that these are not separate wars. These are not isolated attacks, whether a little bit here, a little bit there, a war in Syria, a war in Israel, a war in America. The way the jihadists view it is one war. It is a global war in different theaters. So that's the first point. And the second point I want to make is specifically in regard to the attack in Bangladesh, the purpose was most likely designed to silence those who want to criticize Islam. So Islam is the number one religion in Bangladesh. However, it is considered a secular country. It is the first constitutionally secular country in Asia, in South Asia, and a lot of the Sunni Muslims there practice a form of Islam known as Sufism, which tends to be more spiritual, more mystical, and less violent. Not always, but most of the time. So people who do that would be considered heretics by ISIS. And to the extent that Muslims there support a secular country or are either Shia, Ahmadiyya, or Sufis, they would be a target for ISIS because they don't have the same beliefs. And if they want to criticize what you and I would call, well, I don't know if it's radical Islam, but the ISIS form of Islam or fundamentalist Islam, let me put it that way, then that's blasphemy. That's blasphemy. They're apostates if they're doing it differently. And in this case, terrorism is another way to silence people.
So basically, even though they're Muslim, the reason this is being done in Bangladesh to other Muslims is they view them and their way of life and their more spirituality as much, they view them as much as an infidel as we are.
Right. Maybe even worse because they're apostates.
And now I want to correct myself. I give out your website as vigilancenow.com, but thank you, Dan Noon, for pointing out I made that error. I appreciate it. It's vigilancenow.org. Folks can check out Deborah Weiss.
It's only partially updated, but it'll do.
It's okay. Now, we have a lot to talk about, and you're very generous with your time. You're going to stay with us the entire hour, but I want to know how come. Maybe I'm feeling a little surly today as we head into the July 4th weekend, but how come when terrorism happens in Bangladesh, when it happens in Istanbul, President Obama calls it terrorism, but when it's here, it's extremist or extremist violence or any type of variable, a variable of that slogan. He might say terrorism like he did with Orlando, but he never will say, Islamic terrorism, radical Islamic terrorism, or what did Hillary Clinton call it? Radical jihadism?
I don't know. It had too many qualifiers for me to remember. And that was only when she was pushed. And the same thing with Obama. Actually, with Obama, even when pushed, he refuses to associate it with any form of Islam. And I'm not sure that he'll say it's terrorism there but not here. I think that it's just if he's pushed, if he has really no choice but to say it's terrorism, he'll say it. But he won't admit that there's a tie to the religious motivation to it. And quite frankly, Lou, that's a large part of the reason these attacks are rising. Because in order to have the proper solution to the problem, you have to make a proper diagnosis. And if you purge the words, it's not just a language problem. It's an idea problem. They're purging the words because they don't want to believe that that's what it is. So it's off the table. When they discuss what the plausible reasons are, whether it's Fort Hood or Orlando or any of these attacks, it might be jobs, it might be they had a family problem, it might be post-traumatic stress, even though they didn't have a trauma. It could be anything except for what it really is. And wars like this have to be fought not just on the kinetic level, but on the ideological level also, and we are not doing it. In fact, we are complicit in the Muslim Brotherhood narrative doing just the opposite, saying, oh, it's nothing to do with it, it's nothing to do with it, don't look here. And for as long as we obfuscate it, deny it, and ignore it, the problem will continue to fester, and the jihadists will be emboldened.
All right, Deborah Weiss is our guest, staying here for an extended interview. Please stand by. If you want to get in on the conversation, it's 800-760-KFMB. Lou Pate sitting in for Brett Winnable here on the AM 760 KFMB. Welcome back to the AM 760 KFMB. This is the Brett Winnable Show. Lou Pate sitting in for Brett, along with our team, Dan Noon, John Ingalls. We're bringing it to you. We're making it happen. We have our special guest, Deborah Weiss. She's an expert when it comes to jihad and terrorism. She's an attorney, and she focuses on free speech and terrorism-related issues. Her new book is The Organization of Islamic Cooperation's Jihad on Free Speech. And her site is vigilancenow.org. Deborah Weiss, thank you for your extended time here.
Thank you for having me.
Now, I'll tell you what, for someone who came on to talk about Istanbul, you're quite well versed on Bangladesh. How did that come about?
I have no idea. I realized you only told me about 5 minutes before I came on, and normally I follow everything, but I was in the doctor's office all day.
Well, I appreciate your candor.
And then for analysis, I have the background, so I could tell you a little bit about the U.S. response if you want.
Well, actually, my next question, I had my next question lined up. I was going to ask you, is there any similarity, and I'll put an addendum to it, is there any similarity between how the Obama administration is responding to the Istanbul attack compared to Orlando, but I want to rephrase it and say, is there any similarity how the Obama administration is responding to Istanbul and Orlando, and now with Bangladesh? I don't even know if they've issued a statement. I know the president has been briefed. That's all over the wires. But kind of whenever he speaks to me, it sounds like Charlie Brown's teacher, want. So let's start. Any difference between Istanbul and Orlando?
Istanbul and Orlando. Well, there's a pattern with the administration. One is the deception, even going as far as redacting the phone transcript of the 911 call when the attacker made a call saying, I pledge allegiance to al-Baghdadi, and indicated it was an ISIS-inspired attack, and the Loretta Lynch, the Attorney General, issued a statement which was so ludicrous. I mean, the transcript, like you couldn't, if you would read it, it was fairly long. There's no way that you wouldn't know who it is. And it says, I pledge allegiance to blank. In the name of blank, the merciful, it just went on and on. It was just really crazy. So it just shows you the lengths they'll go to try to really protect Islam from so-called defamation. That's the phrase that the Islamists use, don't defame Islam, which includes don't tell the truth about what's happening with it.
Now, Deborah, doesn't that, I'm glad you brought that up. When you do, and didn't she say we're going to fight them with love?
Yes, love is the most effective counterterrorism strategy we have. Now,
when you try to scrub the transcript, blank the merciful and all of this, doesn't that highlight it more? It's like when someone tries to hide something, the hiding of it is more of a scandal than the actual whatever it is. And in this case, if they would have just come out and said, this guy in Orlando called 911 3 times, pledged allegiance to ISIS and the Islamic State, and then he posted it on Facebook one more time before he was killed. No, we're going to erase that. If they would have just said that, nobody ever would have noticed. Maybe in this case they would have noticed a little bit more because Obama's been so adamant not to acknowledge it. But these are supposed to be smart people. They come off as so dumb.
In a way, you're right, Lou. I think in a way it's good that they did that, because it is not the case that whenever they deny it, nobody notices. In fact, I would argue that a large segment of the population, mostly on the left, but also people who just don't follow this issue, so they don't know, They don't know that it's being scrubbed, as you put it. They don't know what the true facts are. They believe the media. They believe the lies and the indoctrination. But in this case, it was so ludicrous, and the entire world knew what really happened, that it did draw attention to what is this administration doing by scrubbing something we all know to be the case. And they got inundated with complaints. I'd say within, I don't know if it was 30 minutes or 60 minutes, Loretta Lynch wound up issuing an unredacted version due to the complaints. And I think that's a good thing. I think it drew attention not just to the attacker's motivation, but to how this administration handles it. And even the non-redacted version wasn't exactly accurate. Their version said that he said, "Oh, God the merciful, God the greatest," something like that. That's not what he said. He didn't say God. He said Allah. He said Allah. So they still couldn't bring themselves to be very forthcoming. The administration generally is having at least two patterns with all of this. One is to deny, deny, deny. They've purged language from their training materials and their national security agencies, which is very, very dangerous. The people aren't getting the proper training they need. And the second thing is, it's not just language purging at this point. It's just complete deception about the actual facts. And you can see that across the border. That is coming out, Lou, with this administration more and more and more. You see it with the Iran agreement. It was a lie that it happened after Ahmadinejad left. You see it with what's happening with ISIS. They say ISIS is on the run. Clearly, ISIS is on the rise. You see it with Benghazi. It was a video when we all know it was an Al-Qaeda inspired attack, an Al-Qaeda affiliate that committed the attack. It just goes on and on and on. So I'd say those are the two patterns: denial and deception.
Now, back to Bangladesh. Why a cafe? I understand the reasons or the target for the Ataturk airport in Istanbul. By the way, CNN now is reporting that a Russian warlord has organized that airport attack. That just broke right now. Airport, one of the most modern, one of the most busiest in the world, Deborah Weiss. Okay, now 72 or so hours later, just a little quaint cafe in Dhaka, Bangladesh. It seems apples and oranges on the target.
Well, as I said, not really, because the attack was on a cafe that's very crowded, and they did it at a time where it would normally be filled with a lot of young people who are Muslim who are there to break their fast for Ramadan. So they're clearly targeting that. You know, when you asked me before, I would really say that Muslims who are not in sync with the program are really a target before infidels are, because there's nothing they can do short of becoming one of them that would redeem them. So Muslims who believe in a secular state, because ISIS doesn't believe in secular nation states, they don't believe in territorial borders. They want one nation, one global nation, the nation of Islam. It'll be a caliphate implementing Sharia law. If you call yourself a Muslim, but you acknowledge nation states, if you have a secular constitution, or if you practice Sufism, then to them you are an apostate, which is worse than being a Christian or a Jew. So that would be the reason.
It is truly an amazing phenomenon, because Ramadan is supposed to be the holiest month. And actually ISIS, and correct me if I'm wrong, they issued a statement to target white people in America and around the world because of all things. Now, they're blowing up, they're hacking priests, they're stabbing teenage girls in Israel, they're blowing up cafes in Dhaka, Bangladesh, unfolding as we speak. Blew up the airport the other day, and they didn't want to be perceived as racist. So they actually put an edict out there to also kill white people so that they don't look racist. I mean, is that a warped thought, or am I the bigot? Am I the xenophobe? Am I the racist, Deborah Weiss?
Well, if they did that, that's news to me. I had not heard that, but if they did that, obviously it's racist. Sure.
It is truly a phenomenon. So now,
I'll say something else. May I say something? Since you brought up race, it made me think of something else. As you probably know, with the protesters in Ferguson and the Black Lives Matter movement, crime, I mean ordinary everyday crime, not terrorism, has really been on the rise ever since then. And part of the reason is that police officers are afraid to assert their lawful authority and do what they need to do because they're afraid that they're going to be accused of being bigots and maybe prosecuted criminally because that's already happened.
Or even if hold on, I don't want to get way off on a tangent because I can't believe it. They're calling it the Ferguson effect, the blue flu, and you know what? I support the police.
The reason I'm mentioning this, Lou, is because I would argue that an analogous thing is happening in the field of terrorism. Obama has repeatedly called people who want terrorism, Islamic terrorism, investigated and named by name. He has a pattern. In fact, most of the Democrats have a pattern of accusing people who want to name the enemy by name. They've called them bigots, Islamophobes, and xenophobes. And I think you can see that in the military and in our national security apparatus, when there are warning signs, take, for example, Orlando, where the FBI knew that he went to a mosque that had radical affiliations.
Well, yeah,
they're afraid to act on it because they're afraid they'll be called racist and bigots. So it's analogous.
Deborah, I got to take a break, but hold that thought. We'll take a quick break. Our special guest, Deborah Weiss, here on the Brett Winterble Show. You're listening to the AM 760 KFMB. Welcome back to the AM 760 KFMB. This is the Brett Winterble Show. Lou Pate in for Brett, along with Dan Noon, John Ingalls, and our special guest, Deborah Weiss. We are discussing the issue of jihad, Islamic terrorism. There's a terrorist act going on as we speak, and throughout the course of the show, even after Deborah Weiss leaves us, we will give you updates on what is taking part in Dhaka, Bangladesh, where 6 to 8 gunmen stormed a bakery, the Holly Artesian Bakery, 1 mile from the U.S. Embassy. 2 police officers have been killed. About approximately 20 to 40 hostages have been taken, and that is all we have right now at this time. Now, Deborah Weiss, as we make our way to the top of the hour, I have to acknowledge that as Americans, especially going into a holiday weekend, it's hard to keep people's attention. And as Americans, we tend to only care about things that happen in America or pertain to America. So what are the implications of the Istanbul attack and the attack on the girl in Israel and the hacking to death of the Hindu priest and now the ongoing Dhaka, Bangladesh attack for the U.S. presidential election and even the future of U.S. foreign policy, in your opinion?
Yes, I would say that the obvious rise in ISIS has clear implications for an increased likelihood of an attack in America. That is what the CIA Director, John Brennan, testified to merely 2 days after Obama said that they're on the run. After this attack, actually even after the Istanbul attack, the Transportation Security Agency, the TSA, has been looking into ways to either ramp up security or change the location of where they have their security. They're exploring that as I speak. The other response that's very new as of this morning, which I think is a very positive step, is a proposed bill by Majority Leader and Kevin McCarthy in Congress named H.R. 5611, which is the tentatively called the Homeland Safety and Security Act, which pushes the administration to call the enemy for what it is. It acknowledges that the enemy is Islamic terrorists and lone wolf attacks and sympathizers. It broadens the way our country understands it now and tries to, it says here, the present administration has repeatedly ignored the threat posed by the ideology. So this is a bill that's seeking to correct that, and I think that's a really terrific, new thing now, Lou, because thus far, our government really hasn't been doing it. Now, the lies have been propagated by the Democrats, but by and large, the Republicans haven't really been so great on it. They might be a little bit better. A lot of times they're complicit. They go along. They still have countering violent extremism programs, which is really a euphemism for the Islamic terrorism that this administration insists doesn't exist. And a few months ago, the Democrats proposed a bill in Congress, H.R. 569, to condemn Islamophobic speech, which is just ridiculous. 133 out of the 188 Democrats in Congress, last I checked, which was a while ago, maybe it's gone up, have co-sponsored a bill which would